Plaintiffs and appellants went 6-1. They won 6 out of 7 cases against the Trump administration in federal and appeals court just last week. Those are Hall of Fame numbers. If I represented a client that went 1-6 for the week, I'd be fired. But for Donald Trump, it's just reload. Send the Department of Justice in again. Let's see if we can get another loss. Let me break it down for you. These cases matter. And again, just to put it in context, there's over 150 cases in the first 70 days of the Trump administration. 150 cases in the first 70 days. We're still averaging over 2.5 cases a day. As I said, we're going to be around 3,000 or 4,000 cases filed against the Trump administration in his term, depending upon how long it lasts. In the first term, his batting average was terrible. The attorneys general, the public interest groups, the states and all, they were able to win about 80% of the time. Now they're winning over 90% of the time. Sure, there's some losses. There's been about, out of all those 152 cases, less than 10% of them have gone in any way, shape, or form in Donald Trump's favor. And it's really under some unique statutory narrow grounds or standing grounds. Doesn't affect the merits of the case at all, just as to whether a temporary restraining order would be issued. But in the super vast majority of the cases, Donald Trump is losing and losing badly. And the Supreme Court doesn't even seem to be that interested in these cases and has not been bailing Donald Trump out. In fact, the only case that they have ruled upon has been against Donald Trump in the last 3 weeks. Let's go back to the 6-1 record for this week. And I'm Michael Popok. You're on Legal AF. In no particular order, but all this week, Judge Oetken, a Southern District of New York federal judge, issued a temporary restraining order to stop the Trump administration and Kari Lake from putting the Voice of America, which is heard by 450 million people around the world, to stop them from putting them out of business, finding that it's more likely than not that the Trump administration has violated the separation of powers, the Administrative Procedures Act, the Take Care Clause, and the temporary restraining order will stay in place until a preliminary injunction hearing, which will happen in the next week or two, and then up through the resolution of the case. About a day later, Judge Amy Berman Jackson in the District of Columbia issued a temporary restraining order in a 112-page decision to stop the dismantling and the shuttering of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. That is the only entity that Congress created that regulates and does oversight over major banks and non-bank lenders like predatory payday loan lending companies, consumer loan companies, mortgage companies, and the rest. This bureau was born out of the catastrophe of the subprime mortgage crisis, which led to $10 trillion worth of wealth disappearing overnight. That was the bank bailouts. That was the auto bailouts. That was Obama saving the economy and getting elected. And the result was Congress, in a bipartisan way, saying, we think it's a good thing to have Wall Street regulated and consumers protected. Not Donald Trump. He doesn't want Wall Street regulated. He doesn't want banks regulated. And he doesn't want the consumer / his voters protected. Judge Amy Berman Jackson put a stop to it with a temporary restraining order. And she already observed that it's more likely than not that Donald Trump and his administration violated the Administrative Procedures Act, violated the separation of powers, because Article 1 powers are vested in Congress to create entities like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, to fund them, to use bank money, bank fees to fund them. And Donald Trump's only job in that role as the executive branch is to execute on the laws, not create laws, execute on laws created by Congress. Donald Trump thinks he's in the law creation business with executive orders. He's not. And that would upend the constitutional order and the separation of powers. So that's the second loss. Temporary restraining order puts the Voice of America back in business, and a temporary restraining order from Judge Amy Berman Jackson in D.C. puts the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau back in business. Now let's move to the two back-to-back temporary restraining orders on Friday that came out in favor of law firms who Donald Trump tried to put on his shit list. That's a legal term. Did I say that? I meant hit list for Donald Trump. That's a legal term. He's trying to put them out of business in retaliation and vindication or vindictiveness because they opposed him or his policies, or they didn't allow Trump to hire them for any of his dozens and dozens of criminal and civil matters. They didn't let him play in any reindeer games. They didn't pick him on the schoolyard for the game, for the ball game, the kickball game. And now he's paying him back. They represented Robert Mueller, one special counsel, or they represented Jack Smith, another special counsel. And now he tried to blacklist them. And the blacklist was ingenious, except it was illegal. It said that everybody in the firm of Jenner and Block and Wilmer Hale, two major firms, they would not be able to do business with the government any longer. They wouldn't be able to have contracts with the government. They wouldn't be able to represent people who had business before the government. Just as an example, Jenner and Block told the Judge Leon in New York that $500 million, $500 million comes from them representing every year clients before the government, the federal government. They have 100 matters before the federal government right now, before the Internal Revenue Service, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the CFTC, the FTC, the SEC, the Department of Justice, you name it, all right? So this just shows you how Donald Trump is trying to hit them where they live and put them out of business. Not so fast, said Judge Leon. Not so fast, said Judge Bates. You're not putting Jenner and Block and you're not putting Wilmer Hale out of business. I'm stopping it. You're retaliating against them in violation of First Amendment protection. They have you're violating their you're discriminating against them for viewpoint-based content. In other words, you don't like who they're representing or who or what they're doing, and I'm going to stop it. So on Friday, back to back, those two firms joined a third firm who 2 weeks earlier also received a temporary restraining order in D.C. I'm sorry, all the three of these judges are in D.C. from Beryl Howell. That was for Perkins Coie. So Perkins Coie, Jenner and Block, Wilmer Hale, all major law firms, all have temporary restraining orders stopping them from being put out of business by Donald Trump. In let's just set a little bit of context for this. Two firms decided they did not want to fight. Skadden Arps, my old firm, which I'm very upset about, as people know from a hot take I did recently, they are willing to pay $100 million and turn over their diversity, equity, and inclusion hiring practice and their pro bono work over to Donald Trump. And Paul Weiss, $40 million in the same thing. If you fight, you win. If you fight, you'll be remembered. If you fight, nobody has to look back and say, where were the lawyers and the judges during this period of anarchy and fascism? If you don't fight, then you're an embarrassment. So we got the Wilmer Hale, the Jenner and Block, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, TRO, and the Voice of America, TRO. Just to repeat, in case you tuned in late, this is all this past week. Now, you've got some Supreme Court things going on, but nothing in Donald Trump's favor. Donald Trump has run to the Supreme Court 7 times. Okay. In most of the cases, the Supreme Court is not interested in bailing out Donald Trump. And they haven't even figured out how to scrounge up 4 votes of justices to set a briefing schedule to even try to reverse the lower court's decision against Donald Trump. They're not that interested. There's only 3 out of the 7 that they're interested enough to set up a briefing schedule. And on the one that they actually ruled, they ruled against Donald Trump 5-4 to permit an order of a lower court judge, Judge Ali, to require that the U.S. aid pay $2 billion worth of its debts. So Supreme Court is not rushing. One thing I'm observing is the Supreme Court is not rushing to bail out Donald Trump. They set another briefing schedule about the reinstatement of probationary employees by a federal judge in San Francisco. But other than that, they're just sort of, we're not that interested. Have it come up through the normal course. run this through preliminary injunction mode or summary judgment mode at the trial court level, go up to the Court of Appeals. We'll see you later. Yeah. And Donald Trump is probably beside himself and perplexed why the Supreme Court's not bailing him out. I'll give you a couple of reasons. Stop bashing the federal courts, calling for their impeachment and saying the federal judges are corrupt and criminal, and maybe you'll get John Roberts and or Kavanaugh to support you. But until then, as I said, I thought Donald Trump attacking the federal courts put at risk certain votes on the Supreme Court. And as of right now, there's no giant conga line to the Supreme Court of cases, and the Supreme Court is ignoring Donald Trump. Now, there was one win. I said at the top of this hot take that there was 6-1 for the week. There was one win. There was also a win at the Supreme Court for the Joe Biden era ghost gun policies, making sure that ghost guns are regulated and the people that buy them, do-it-yourself kits to make guns at home, that they're registered so that the law enforcement knows about them. Another loss for the Trump administration during the week. Now, one win for the Trump administration. May be reversed by the Supreme Court, but it is what it is. In a 2-1 decision, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, led by Henderson, supporting Trump, and Walker supporting Trump, but Millett, another Obama appointee, not supporting Trump, ruled that it was okay for him to fire a board member on the Merit Service Protection Board and on the National Labor Relations Board, two entities that try to protect workers, federal workers and collective bargaining union workers. And now they've been put out of business because this court, 2-1, has decided that Trump, in violation of 100 years of precedent from a case dating back to 1935 or so, called Humphrey's Executor, reaffirmed by the United States Supreme Court in a 2020 case called Cellular. This 2-1 panel said, no, it's okay. Even though Congress created it, it's bipartisan, it's not exercising that much executive power. The executive branch can fire whoever they want. By firing these two members, there's no longer a quorum. Without a quorum, the Merit Service Protection Board can't protect civil workers, civil servants in federal government, which is exactly what Donald Trump wants. And the National Labor Relations Board can't do its job to protect collective bargaining and workplace practices. Good job, unions that didn't support Kamala Harris. This is what you got. And now we'll have to see with the appeal in the National Labor Relations Board case. They've asked for, or both cases, they've asked for a stay of the order to allow for an en banc appeal. So all 20 or so judges would then hear it. In order to have an en banc, instead of just having your 3-judge panel, have all the judges, you'd have to get a majority of the 20. You'd have to get like 11 to think this is interesting. And then you got to have a majority that vote in your favor. So we'll see. They'll do some polling and we'll see if there's enough people to be interested in seeing the briefing on that. Terrible week for Donald Trump, an amazing week for justice as Donald Trump finds himself between a rock and a hard place that consists of federal judges protecting our democracy. We're doing our own part here. Thanks for joining me on Legal AF. Hit the free subscribe button. Help us continue to grow this pro-democracy channel. I'm Michael Popok. In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.